So for this bow I wanted to make one of these, what's often called an American style longbow. With these you can see a raised up handle section, often glued on. Often these are longbow like, but usually flat bow in cross section rather than the classic English D shape. And if you want a more in-depth tutorial on this, I'm going to link to this gent's video, Dan Santana Bows, down the description. But now I'm going to show you how I did it. So for this bow, like my Plains Indian bow, I started off with a piece of ash. This was kiln dried, planed all over ash. And what I did was I cut off the ends where there's a bit of grain runoff, and then I cut out a handle section, which is this piece here. So for this, to glue this on, what I do first is get an old hacksaw blade and just run it up and down the gluing surfaces, both on the handle and here on the body of the bow itself, where it's going to get glued on. This just helps something for the glue to adhere to and give it more surface area to bind onto. And then one thing I do obviously is make sure that I'm putting down something to cover my work surface. I did use cling film. I later swapped over to parchment paper just because the cling film tended to unravel and stick to things. It wasn't as good as I needed. And this is something I really suggest you do when you're using your wood glues on kiln dried timber. You can actually see here in that bottom right piece especially how quickly the glue is just soaking into the timber. If you want a really good glue up, sometimes it's good to put a first coat on basically and let it sit on the bow for a while. As you can see here, as I touch my finger to this piece, it basically comes away almost completely dry. The glue has just been sucked right into the wood. If you're to glue this up like this, it might stick, but it won't be near as strong as if you let it soak in for a little bit and then glue it up with a second layer like I did here. Just a small little tip, but I find it really, really useful when you're gluing up this sort of wood, which can be really, really dry. So for this then, I lined it up, glued these up, and then just secured them in place with two clamps and left it overnight, and then started to shape the handle the next day. So the easiest way I found was to rough it out with a chisel, as you see here, and then finish it off with a bit of a rasp. Once I had that done, I marked out my profile, as you can see here, taking into account some of this grain runoff. And from here I started to work this out with the draw knife and start to round out the belly of the bow a little bit. This is really the guts of the work on this bow, because it is in thickness not that far off what I need, at least to start tillering. This is a pretty good place to start with it. And then I moved on to the backing. So for this, as you probably saw in the thumbnail and in the title, I did start off with this, a big old bedsheet. Now, I was not doing a backing here to create structural tension and to add any sort of power to the bow. I really wanted this backing for two reasons. One, I wanted to try backing a bow, something I've never done. So an old bedsheet, I had one, we're going to throw it out, and I thought, why not try it out with this? And two, this gave a bit of a failsafe. I really wasn't sure about building a bow like this. I've never built a board bow. I'm always chasing rings and doing a kind of classic longbow shape. So with this, it gave me an extra bit of security if things did go petong, that if the bow kind of blew apart, there would be something on the back holding it together, and I might hopefully avoid injury. So all I did was lie the bow down on the sheet, get a good scissors and cut it out and go from there. So then what I did, I used Type On 3 pretty much for all my glue ups, especially with bows. It's just a really great glue for most of your needs, so one I really would highly recommend. Same thing, I let the glue rub onto the back of the bow here and let it sit for a little bit, and then smooth it all in so it's a nice even layer across the back of the bow. Then I lay down my bed sheet, and all I did here was just lay this down, starting at the top, slowly rolling it down, making sure to get the glue to absorb into the material. This is just simple cotton, and it does work as a backing. Like I said, this isn't a guaranteed failsafe for the bow. No backing really is. It's the construction, how you go about doing it, that is the failsafe. So then I just smoothed this all out with my finger, making sure that the glue was fully even and there's no air bubbles in it. And then to help ensure that this was going on properly, basically put in a slight deflex. Now this isn't to glue in deflex, it's actually to help the material go taut when I fully remove all of the air bubbles. So basically what would happen is I'd remove that, and as you can see here, it did work. Now the big mistake I made, which you're about to see right now, is that I forgot to take the clamps off, and resulted with two nice little divots in the middle of the bow. Now that's eventually going to get wrapped up in a leather handle. I'm going to do a separate video on that, but this is what it looked like after the glue up. So didn't really like the look of it, and I really wanted to try this because I thought the contrast would look really cool. So I got some good quality black spray paint and sprayed the backing of the bow, and this is what I was left with. And honestly, I thought it looked pretty nice. Next up, I had to remove the excess cotton backing. So one thing, when you've cut away the worst of it, use a wood file and push away from you. Don't pull up, because it's going to pull the backing off the bow. That applies for any type that you use. Most of it I just cut away with a decent pocket knife like I did here, but I did use a decent wood file to just take away any little bits that had draped over the edge and any kind of excess wood glue, where I didn't want to risk pulling any additional backing up and off the bow. Next up then, I marked in the nocks. So for this I just went an inch down and put in a 45-degree line, and that's how I tend to generally mark out my nocks. Pretty simple method, but I find it's pretty full safe and works pretty well. When I go to cut in my nocks, what I like to do is I could get a knife first and just score a bit of a line to guide the file that I use. Often I'll use a rod saw, which is what you see here, and then swap over to a fine wood file just to pretty it up. But this I find is a much quicker way to get them in when I need to. Once I've got that done, then I move on to assembling the string. And this is generally how I like to do it. I usually go with the Flemish twist. I use two wood clamps, just mark them, measure out the distance, and use my kitchen cabinets as the place that I'm clamped onto. This one was a 16 strand, so 8 each side, and then I go about making my Flemish twist string. Now this one, the next mistake I made was to make it slightly longer than it needed to be. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it just meant I had to take apart the end of the string later on and just reassemble it. But strings are one of those things, I don't mind doing it, but I really also don't enjoy doing it. It's a necessity of making bows, but I know some people really get a kick out of it. I've just never enjoyed it. I always mess up some part, and this is the finished product. And I use this for tillering, so I don't put a serving on it just yet because I don't know where the bow is going to end up. So this is the first go of tillering with this, just slowly working to get some sort of a bend in the bow. And then the weather is pretty nice lately, so I brought it outside and started to get some initial tillering going with it. This is pretty slow. The bow was still very thick at this point, so there was a lot of shaving to do. So this is pretty much the real building process of a bow. You'll see me going, looking at it, getting some bend in it, slowly marking the areas that I need to remove material, coming back inside, getting my cabinet scraper, scraping off any of the bits that need it. So this is one of the reasons why I like having the option to be able to fix my tillering as I do it in place. So everything here is starting to bend. You can see a bit of a stiff point here, a little bit stiff from kind of here down, which we'll work on as we start to get strong. Here it's ready to be strong. It's up to about brace height now. Obviously these tips need a bit more bend in them. However, if we look side on, you can see, if you look up the bow, it's ever so slight of a twist coming this way. You can see this limb is dipped ever so slightly this way. Now it was going the other way earlier, so thankfully I've kind of rectified this. I've gone a bit too far. But if we look at the opposite side, you can see now it's also twisting this way. Let's see if the sun won't catch it. There we go. You can see a slight twist this way as well. So obviously I don't want to leave it here too long. This allows me to check this because this is useful to know. So twisting this way on this side, that way on the other side. So there's a bit of a propeller twist, which means the whole thing's kind of going, one's going one way, one's going the other way. So we know for this then, I'm going to ease up a little bit down the inside of that side of the bow, and then from here down basically we just want to take a little bit more off. And then on this side, we're starting to get the slightest of hinge here. So I'm going to go kind of from here back. I'm taking material off. And a big bit here. And then focus a little bit more on the inside in here. Just to even out that bend. And that'll be us. So this is always make or break moment in any bow, putting the string on the first time, because there's a lot that can go wrong. So what I generally do as a rule of thumb for your brace height is normally take it out 4 inches back from the knock and then adjust from there really. Obviously everyone will be slightly different draw lengths, arm sizes, all that fun stuff, so I did about 4 inches and doing the bow ears knot. Make sure we're actually at 4 inches. Sometimes you do a bow ears knot and then it loosens, but I've been tillering with this string, which is why I like to do that with B55, because B55 stretches a lot. So it allows me to make sure that this is pre-stretched, so not worse when you go to string bow the first time. The string stretches and you lose your size. So, the bow is not up on this end. It's stretching a little bit, but a little bit low. But it hasn't broken apart. So I'll probably tiller at this low brace height for now. See how this acts. And then readjust the string in a few minutes and see how it feels. But we're looking pretty even, so you can live with that. So what I'm going to do is put in the tillering tree, a bit of a pull, just see where we're sitting. Thing I like to do after tillering the bow, you'll see here now the knocks have basically been slowly worked away, so it's important to go back over them and just make sure the knocks are sitting how they should, they're as deep as they should, and wrapping around into the belly of the bow, which is how I like to do it. You might like to do it differently. Then I move on to serving the string. So the serving is this little protective layer where your arrow normally sits, also thickens up the string, gives the arrow something to bite onto. And I used a nice green thread for this, so it'll look quite fetching. So get the servings on. I like to go about 8 inches on this, so I'll pick the center point for each side, snip off the excess, and then get the lighter out and just burn away any little straggly bits. And then my secret tool that I really enjoy using is the orbital sander, changing out the discs, going from a somewhat coarse grit right up to a very fine grit. Just speeds up the process. Now I do finish by hand, but this is the way that I like to do it. It speeds everything up. And then checking out the bow's actual draw weight, which was 65 pounds at 28 inches. And then the final process is oil and varnish. So here I'm putting on some coats of Danish oil, and you can really see the beautiful color contrast in that ash coming out here once it gets a bit of oil after that sanding. Really started to look wonderful. So now we're going to look at some shooting with the bow.
Okay, very first shot out of this board bow. Ooh, that's got some snap on it. Alright. Try it. A bit of a longer draw. How it feels. Alright, alright. Yeah. Alright, now we'll go back to my usual 28 30-inch draw, see how that works. Alright, shooting.